July 11, 1943, opened with a stillness over southeastern Sicily, the Mediterranean lying flat while invasion fleets churned invisibly beyond the horizon. From the hills near Frascati, Albert Kesselring studied reports with practiced calm, convinced the enemy had violated every rule governing successful amphibious warfare. German doctrine taught that landings without immediate armored dominance invited annihilation, particularly when infantry stood exposed before artillery and defensive depth existed. At Gela, American soldiers clung to narrow sand corridors, their supply lines fragile, their heavy weapons delayed, their cohesion strained by wind-scattered airborne drops. Kesselring believed the first day decided everything, because momentum during initial contact shaped morale before logistics could impose inevitability. He remembered Dieppe vividly, a lesson written in blood, where armored counterattack erased ambition within hours against trapped Allied forces. Sicily appeared to offer the same geometry, beaches pressed against water, attackers compressed, defenders maneuvering freely from interior lines. German reconnaissance emphasized confusion among paratroopers, units wandering farmland instead of forming defensive screens against armored thrusts. To Kesselring, this confirmed vulnerability, because airborne dislocations signaled planning overstretch rather than calculated dispersion. The Hermann Göring Division represented certainty amid chaos, rebuilt, ideologically hardened, and equipped to apply decisive force where infantry weakness exposed opportunity. Tiger tanks symbolized that certainty. Steel instruments meant to dominate space through fear, protection, and killing power beyond enemy response. 17 Tigers advancing toward Gela embodied decades of doctrinal confidence, proof that concentrated armor crushed any beachhead lacking comparable force. American infantry doctrine relied on combined arms synchronization, yet synchronization required time, and time was precisely what Sicily denied. Kesselring concluded the invaders had gambled everything on scale, believing numbers alone could compensate for initial vulnerability. He underestimated something less visible, a transformation in warfare where distance itself became a weapon, severing traditional relationships between front and rear. As dawn approached, German commanders prepared to execute a textbook counterstroke, confident the sea would trap the enemy more effectively than fortifications. Albert Kesselring calculated victory using numbers that had never betrayed him before, distances measured, fuel consumption estimated, reaction times compared against historical precedent. The beachhead appeared shallow, the Allied infantry thin, their armor absent, their artillery offshore and supposedly irrelevant against armored thrusts. Every previous amphibious failure reinforced his certainty. German staff officers compiled strength tables showing overwhelming qualitative superiority, Tigers immune to Allied guns, veteran crews hardened by Eastern Front survival. American formations were new, inexperienced, recently blooded in North Africa, with mixed results still haunting their reputation. Kesselring trusted these comparisons, believing experience multiplied firepower more reliably than raw numbers. Doctrine framed his confidence, because German operational art emphasized rapid counterattack before an enemy could stabilize vulnerable lodgements. He believed hesitation was fatal, speed decisive, shock irreplaceable once an invasion lost momentum. The first 24 hours defined success, after which industrial weight rendered tactical brilliance increasingly irrelevant. Kesselring understood logistics deeply, knowing that unloading artillery, tanks, and supplies required uncontested time and secure beaches. Interrupt that window, and the invasion collapsed under its own ambition. He assumed Allied naval guns could not effectively support dispersed infantry beyond immediate shoreline defenses. His mind returned repeatedly to Dieppe, where Allied troops learned painfully that courage without heavy support invited massacre. Sicily seemed to echo that lesson: narrow beaches, exposed men, interior German maneuver space intact. The sea behind the Americans' limited retreat, magnifying panic under armored pressure. Reports from Luftwaffe reconnaissance described scattered airborne units, disorganized resistance inland, and roads open for exploitation. Kesselring interpreted this as systemic failure rather than temporary disruption. He believed Allied planners had overreached, mistaking numerical abundance for operational resilience. The Hermann Göring Division symbolized certainty, elite status, ideological cohesion, and equipment superiority fused into one formation. Its presence reassured Berlin that the counterattack would not merely delay the invasion, but annihilate it outright. Kesselring expected decisive results before midday. Tigers led the arithmetic, each machine theoretically worth several enemy tanks, each gun capable of dominating kilometers of terrain. 17 such vehicles represented an armored fist few armies could resist. Kesselring assumed American morale would fracture upon first contact with their advance. He discounted naval firepower as blunt and inaccurate, suitable for bombardment but not precision battlefield influence. German experience suggested ships fired slowly, adjusted poorly, and lacked responsiveness against fast-moving ground threats. This assumption underpinned his entire operational confidence. Weather reinforced optimism, clear skies, good visibility, and terrain favoring armored movement across open approaches to Gela. Nothing suggested interference from unseen forces beyond traditional battlefield parameters. Kesselring prepared his reports accordingly, framing success as inevitable rather than contingent. The mathematics appeared flawless, force ratios favorable, timing perfect, enemy exposed, doctrine validated by decades of precedent. Yet those numbers excluded one variable: reach. They assumed the battlefield ended at the shoreline, and that assumption would soon prove catastrophic. As German columns advanced, confidence traveled with them, orders crisp, expectations high, minds anchored, and victories passed. Kesselring awaited confirmation, believing history was about to repeat itself faithfully. At Gela, the invasion balanced on minutes, because infantry landed before armor, artillery lagged offshore, and command links fractured under surf and smoke. American regiments dug shallow scrapes while naval guns thundered overhead. Every delay magnified risk, as German armor maneuvered inland preparing a decisive counterstroke during the fragile dawn hours. Landing craft withdrew, leaving men exposed, supplies piled on sand, radios soaked, officers improvising under fire. Engineers fought surf to clear exits, while medics dragged wounded beyond tides. The beachhead existed only because cohesion held, fragile discipline resisting fear, confusion, and exhaustion during relentless uncertainty before German pressure fully arrived. American commanders understood doctrine's warning. The first day determined survival, yet reality denied neat execution. Tanks bogged, ammunition trickled, maps proved unreliable. Units fought in isolation, counting hours until heavier weapons appeared, knowing any breach could roll the defense back into the sea under relentless psychological strain from constant bombardment. German probes tested the perimeter, infantry skirmishes escalating as armor gathered beyond sight. Reports conflicted, some exaggerated threats, others minimized danger. Uncertainty ruled decisions because no commander possessed a complete picture of beaches, exits, and inland approaches simultaneously amid smoke, noise, fatigue, and constant interruptions from enemy fire and confusion. The absence of heavy artillery haunted planners, because without it infantry countered armor using courage and improvisation. Bazookas waited at choke points, engineers prepared demolitions, and naval gunfire liaison teams hunted targets. Coordination demanded trust, timing, and nerves under extreme pressure across fractured communications networks that failed repeatedly throughout the morning. Naval gunfire became the unseen shield, battleships and cruisers firing inland beyond visual range. Spotters corrected salvos amid chaos, translating flashes and dust into coordinates. This reach altered equations, extending American firepower far past beaches, complicating German assumptions about safe maneuver space during critical daylight hours for advancing columns inland. Infantry learned quickly, adjusting fields of fire, digging deeper, coordinating with tanks as they arrived piecemeal. Leadership emerged at small unit levels, sergeants making decisions without guidance. Survival depended on adaptability, replacing rigid plans with immediate problem-solving under fire while exhaustion accumulated steadily through endless alerts and alarms constantly. German commanders underestimated resilience, expecting panic once armor appeared. Instead they met layered resistance, naval fire, and stubborn infantry holding ground. Each failed probe consumed time, fuel, and momentum. The 24 hours slipped away, eroding the decisive window doctrine demanded for counterattacks to succeed before consolidation was complete ashore. Psychological strain defined the beachhead, because every sound suggested armor, every horizon threatened collapse. Yet cohesion held, reinforced by leadership presence and shared purpose. Men measured time by survival, counting minutes until daylight passed without catastrophe or decisive breakthrough against overwhelming uncertainty from anticipated armored thrusts inland that morning alone. By nightfall heavier weapons landed, tanks crawled forward, and artillery began shaping ground inland. The beachhead thickened, exits widened, and supply flowed steadier. German opportunity narrowed as Allied mass accumulated, transforming vulnerability into defensive depth through persistence and endurance despite sustained pressure from nearby formations attempting renewed thrusts inland again. The 24 hours ended without collapse, a strategic victory born from survival rather than maneuver. Doctrine failed Germany because time favored the invader once endurance prevailed. Jella endured the test, proving that modern warfare rewarded resilience, integration, and reach beyond traditional expectations of counterattack theory during amphibious landings specifically. What followed flowed from that day because survival enabled expansion, logistics, and overwhelming force. The beachhead's endurance invalidated confident arithmetic, exposing assumptions about reach and firepower. Jella's hours reshaped the campaign, marking the moment initiative slipped irreversibly from German hands across southern Sicily after desperate fighting on exposed shores there. Before dawn, the Hermann Göring Division began moving, columns tightening as engines warmed beneath Sicilian hills quietly waiting. 17 Tiger tanks led the advance. Crews' confident armor and guns promised uncontested dominance across the coastal approaches now. Doctrine guided every movement, because speed toward beaches seemed decisive before Allied consolidation fully occurred at Jella sectors. Dust rose behind armored tracks, signaling commitment that could not be recalled once contact occurred. Infantry rode half-tracks alert, expecting shattered resistance and rapid breakthrough toward sand and surf. Officers calculated minutes carefully, believing shock alone would unravel defenders trapped between steel and sea without heavy weapons available. The Tigers advanced methodically, commanders trusting frontal armor against anything encountered ashore. Their presence embodied German faith in technological supremacy, cultivated across years of battlefield success. Each kilometer forward reinforced confidence, because no prior amphibious landing had survived concentrated armor thrusts delivered so early with discipline intact. Radio traffic crackled with assurance, reports describing minimal opposition and clear routes. Reconnaissance underestimated naval fire reach, misjudging unseen threats offshore. This miscalculation framed the movement, shaping decisions that pushed armor forward without dispersion or adequate infantry screens, protecting flanks from unexpected firepower. Terrain narrowed options, funneling tanks along roads bordered by stone walls and orchards. Such channels favored defenders, yet German planners dismissed risks, expecting speed to overwhelm resistance. Momentum became Doctrine's substitute for caution, as Tigers rolled steadily closer to shoreline objectives believed within grasp. Air support failed to appear consistently, weather and Allied fighters complicating coordination overhead. Still, the advance continued because armored doctrine emphasized autonomy once committed. Commanders trusted steel, training, and experience to overcome any obstacle encountered before noon when victory reports were expected. As distance closed, naval gunfire observers detected movement, relaying coordinates with urgency. German crews sensed nothing unusual, engines drowning subtle warnings. Confidence persisted, rooted in past triumphs, blinding leaders to changing warfare realities, integrating sea-based firepower with ground defense seamlessly. The Hermann Göring Division pressed onward, unaware calculations were collapsing. Tigers remained formidable, yet environment stripped advantages incrementally. Shoreward movement transformed from demonstration of dominance into exposure, as unseen guns aligned patiently beyond horizon lines controlled by Allied fleets. Infantry dismounted cautiously, probing villages and crossroads for resistance. Contact remained light, reinforcing belief defenses were thin. This illusion encouraged tighter formations, reducing flexibility precisely when dispersion might have mitigated forthcoming devastation from coordinated fires, awaiting optimal range windows. Commanders envisioned breakthrough timelines, mapping routes toward beaches and supply dumps. These plans ignored naval artillery arcs, an oversight born from continental assumptions. The sea, once boundary, became weapon, redefining engagement space beyond traditional land warfare comprehension. When the first salvos landed nearby, disbelief rippled through ranks. Explosions erupted without visible enemy, challenging every assumption underpinning the advance. Tigers halted instinctively, crews searching horizons, while Doctrine offered no guidance against battleships firing kilometers inland unseen. Thus the movement toward shore reached its crisis, momentum shattered by realization. Hermann Göring Division faced an enemy operating beyond expected limits, combining domains seamlessly. What began as confident advance now teetered toward catastrophe, shaped by misjudgment rather than courage or equipment failure alone. The American infantry huddled in shallow foxholes behind sand dunes, waiting for support that had not yet arrived, their nerves taut as the first gray light of morning revealed the distant silhouettes of approaching German armor. Each man understood the gravity of their position, exposed without tank support, relying entirely on rifles, machine guns, and personal courage to hold the line against superior firepower. Scouts reported the advancing Tigers, massive shapes cutting through the haze, their 88mm guns capable of annihilating anything in sight, yet the Americans stayed calm, suppressing panic with discipline drilled into them in training camps across the United States. Their mission was simple, terrifying, and clear: hold the beachhead at all costs until reinforcements could reach them. Every foxhole contained men from different states, different units, united by necessity and imminent danger, each soldier clutching weapons that seemed almost inadequate against the approaching mechanized nightmare. Ammunition was rationed, every round precious, while officers barked orders with urgency, demanding fire discipline, coordinated volleys, and steadfast attention to cover and fields of fire across the sand. The beach churned with anticipation. Every sound amplified: the distant clatter of tank tracks, the groan of engines, the faint metallic echo of approaching panther treads, all signs that the enemy was closer than any soldier dared whisper. Each infantryman's heartbeat seemed to synchronize with the rhythm of mechanical giants rolling inexorably toward them. Mortar and artillery lay silent, awaiting observers' calls for fire, leaving the men as the first line of resistance, their presence alone forming an obstacle. Every hedgerow, dune, and crater became a defensive position, improvised yet effective, with rifles aimed at gaps between tanks, hoping that human determination could offset technological superiority in a confrontation that theory predicted would be suicidal. Officers moved cautiously among positions, checking weapons, issuing encouragement, and reinforcing lines, aware that the men depended on leadership to transform fear into resolve. They calculated angles of fire, overlapping arcs and choke points, seeking to maximize the effectiveness of infantry weapons against armor that no rifle could penetrate frontally, relying entirely on flank shots and clever positioning. The Germans advanced steadily, confident, believing American soldiers would falter under the weight of steel and doctrine, yet the infantry held, methodically picking targets, waiting for openings, and refusing to be pushed back. Every panther that moved too slowly or exposed its side was met with concentrated fire from bazookas and 57mm anti-tank rifles, small weapons wielded with immense courage and precision. Communication was critical. Runners and radios connecting the line with observers and command posts, transmitting coordinates for artillery strikes while avoiding panic and confusion. Every transmission carried tension, every order was life or death, and the soldiers understood that misjudgment could mean annihilation. Yet they continued, breathing deeply, steadying their hands, and keeping sight on the advancing German formation. Exhaustion and fear were present, but contained, replaced with a grim resolve that only extreme circumstances forge. The Americans knew that their role was pivotal, not merely to survive, but to buy time, to hold a position so that artillery, reinforcements, and naval support could engage effectively, transforming the beachhead from a vulnerable target into a bastion of resistance. Men shouted, fired, reloaded, and moved with careful coordination, their small arms hammering at vulnerable sections of panther flanks, machine guns covering approaches, and each successful hit offering a glimmer of hope in the shadow of seemingly unstoppable armor. They adapted, learning to exploit every minor flaw in the German advance, improvising against the overwhelming odds they faced. The deafening roar of engines, punctuated by distant artillery, became a rhythm of survival, a cadence that each soldier internalized, measuring distance, timing bursts of fire, and anticipating movement with near prescience. Their training, determination, and unity transformed fear into a tangible, tactical resistance, proving that disciplined infantry could withstand the might of mechanized fury. As the hours stretched on, the beachhead remained under American control, a testament to human endurance and resolve. Alone, without tanks or heavy armor initially in place, the infantry held against one of the most formidable armored divisions in history, buying precious time for the Allies to stabilize positions, call in reinforcements, and begin turning what seemed inevitable disaster into the first steps of survival and eventual victory. The rumble of naval artillery echoed across the shoreline as battleships and cruisers opened fire from beyond the horizon, their massive guns spitting shells over distances that no man on the beach could see, yet the sound carried a promise of support. The infantry, exhausted from hours of holding the line, felt a surge of hope at the distant thunder of allied steel. Observers atop sand dunes scanned the German positions with binoculars, calling coordinates back to the naval gunners, who adjusted fire with precision, aiming for fortified emplacements and armored concentrations. Each explosion shook the earth, sending plumes of sand and debris skyward, disrupting panther columns, scattering infantry, and forcing German commanders to reassess the risk of pushing forward under bombardment they could barely perceive. Smoke from burning tanks mixed with the salt haze, creating a surreal battlefield where visibility was limited. Yet the sailors' calculations and observers' corrections created lethal arcs of fire. Each salvo was measured in tons of iron and explosive force, designed to fracture enemy morale, destroy armor, and compensate for the infantry's lack of heavy guns, reinforcing the line they clung to with desperation. Small landing craft ferried reinforcements and ammunition under the shadow of naval guns, the thrum of diesel engines blending with distant booms. Soldiers watched as crates of supplies touched shore, their hands shaking from adrenaline and fatigue. But every box represented the difference between holding the beach and being overrun by Germany's elite armor. The coordination between sea and land became a symphony of destruction, each shell a note in a deadly arrangement designed to stop the German advance. Sailors adjusted trajectories in real time, observers shouted corrections, and the infantry adapted, moving from cover to cover with renewed vigor, trusting that the unseen steel would strike precisely where it was needed. Kessler's Tigers pressed forward, unaware that the very force they expected to be impotent was slowly eroding their momentum. Each shell that landed near their flanks or rear forced them to halt, reposition, and absorb casualties, and the sheer unpredictability of naval bombardment disrupted German cohesion, leaving them exposed to infantry fire from positions previously considered untenable. The beachhead trembled with every volley, yet soldiers held firm, recognizing that these distant allies were not merely supportive, but decisive. Communication between forward observers, artillery officers, and the ship captains became critical, each message conveying coordinates with deadly accuracy. The sound of massive guns reassured weary men that they were not alone in facing the approaching armored terror. Visibility remained poor, yet explosions illuminated fleeting glimpses of German armor and infantry formations. The massive concussions caused vehicles to stall or veer off course, forcing panicked crews to expose their weaker sides to infantry fire. Every detonation was both tactical and psychological, reminding the enemy that their dominance over the battlefield was far from absolute, and the Americans were not helpless. The rhythm of fire established a pace, allowing infantry to regroup, reposition, and exploit gaps created by naval bombardment. Machine guns, rifles, and anti-tank weapons became more effective as the enemy's formation was disrupted. Each man understood the importance of timing, aligning movements with artillery bursts, creating a deadly dance that combined precision, courage, and the unseen power of steel from the sea. Naval fire forced German commanders to reconsider the pace of their attack, slowing the momentum of armored advances and buying precious hours for reinforcements to reach the front. Kessler, confident in doctrine, now faced unpredictable destruction from a domain he had assumed irrelevant, realizing that conventional wisdom underestimated the impact of heavy naval artillery coordinated with forward land observers. Men in the trenches adapted to the intermittent tremors, calculating safe moments to fire, reload, and reposition. They learned to read the smoke, listen for distant explosions, and anticipate the next impact point, transforming fear into calculated aggression, leveraging the distant yet precise firepower to neutralize threats far beyond their immediate reach, and keeping the beachhead intact against overwhelming odds. By midday, the combined effect of infantry resilience and naval artillery had disrupted the German assault enough to stabilize the American position. Tigers and Panzer IVs were stalled, infantry pinned, and the beach no longer seemed like a death trap. The steel from beyond sight had become the lifeline, allowing the smallest unit to resist the might of one of the most elite divisions in history. The battlefield stretched in a haze of smoke and sand. Yet forward observers on ridges adjusted their binoculars, calculating ranges that seemed impossible. From 20 kilometers away, Massive guns roared, their shells arcing over hills and valleys with deadly precision, reaching targets that commanders on the ground had believed were beyond lethal range. Artillery officers aboard the cruisers and battleships followed calculations transmitted via radio, each correction honing the trajectory closer to destruction. The Americans had leveraged mathematics and observation to create a lethal envelope where distance was no barrier. Every shell landing tens of kilometers away reshaped the battlefield, turning German expectations of invulnerability into panic and confusion among armored crews. Kessler had assumed the beachhead's defenders would be overwhelmed by sheer proximity, yet the Americans defied logic. Observers adjusted firing angles constantly, accounting for wind, humidity, and rolling terrain, effectively extending the reach of naval guns to strike armored spearheads with surgical precision. Even the Tiger's legendary armor was vulnerable to such coordinated, long-distance attacks. The Germans advanced, unaware that the very coordinates they assumed safe were now a death sentence. Each tank that rolled into the calculated kill zone risked destruction before reaching the infantry line. Forward crews noted flashes and explosions, adjusting fire in real time, transforming theoretical reach into practical lethality, and turning the concept of impossible artillery into a tactical reality. Observers on elevated terrain marked impacts with flags and notes, then radioed corrections to naval gunners. Calculations that seemed theoretical now manifested in reality. Shells landing with precision that decimated forward units. Every tank destroyed, every crew pinned or killed, reinforced the strategic lesson. Distance was no defense against meticulous observation, mathematics, and well-trained artillery crews acting in concert. American infantry, hidden behind dunes and hedgerows, watched distant plumes erupt from the horizon. Each detonation disrupted enemy formations, created gaps, and allowed units to maneuver. The psychological effect on German crews was profound, as Tigers and Panzer IVs that had been symbols of invincibility suddenly became vulnerable targets, undermining morale while enabling American forces to exploit weaknesses. Kessler's calculations, based on conventional doctrine, assumed American defenses were limited to short-range engagements. The 20-kilometer artillery reach shattered these assumptions. German commanders now faced the reality of being targeted by guns that should have been irrelevant, forcing armored divisions to halt, reposition, or suffer catastrophic losses, all while under constant threat from infantry and supporting fire. Each observation post communicated with the naval fleet, as if plotting coordinates for a chessboard. Explosions forced Germans to overcorrect, driving their formations into confusion. Tigers attempted to flank, yet the longer their exposure to distant fire, the more attrition they suffered. Every armored advance became a calculated risk rather than a guaranteed breakthrough, undermining decades of German doctrine. Shells, striking far beyond normal range, forced a re-evaluation of armored tactics. Kessler could not comprehend how Americans had synchronized observation, mathematics, and firepower to achieve what seemed impossible. Even elite crews were stunned as Tigers lost cohesion under a barrage that theory suggested could not affect them, demonstrating that superior weaponry alone did not ensure battlefield success. The calculation worked because it exploited time and space. Artillery fire, invisible until impact, constrained movement, disrupted formations, and allowed infantry to exploit gaps. Even if only a portion of rounds hit, the psychological and physical damage multiplied, rendering elite tanks ineffective before they could engage their targets. Observers ensured each volley maximized destructive potential across 20 kilometers. German infantry accompanying the armored units were equally vulnerable. Shells landing behind lines created panic, severed supply routes, and destroyed command cohesion. Every explosion reshaped the battlefield, forcing Kessler to reconsider tactics, as assumptions of rapid armor domination collided with a reality defined by ingenuity, precision, and long-range gunnery that defied conventional expectations of warfare in 1943. By afternoon, the 20-kilometer kill zone had transformed the operation. Panther and Tiger units were stalled, vehicles destroyed, and crews disoriented. The combination of observation, calculation, and disciplined fire from naval guns achieved what seemed impossible, demonstrating that strategy, mathematics, and coordination could defeat even the most elite formations, reshaping the Sicilian battlefield and the calculus of armored warfare. Tigers rolled forward across the rocky Sicilian terrain, their engines growling like predators, yet the crews could not comprehend the invisible threat waiting at extreme range. Explosions erupted around them, shells impacting where no enemy had been sighted, creating confusion and panic. Experienced commanders realized too late that conventional tactics could not mitigate this unprecedented hazard. The armored columns attempted to maintain formation, yet every impact forced minor adjustments that multiplied into chaos. Crews peered through periscopes, scanning hills and beaches for obvious threats, but nothing appeared. Each shell strike shattered assumptions, demonstrating that enemy firepower could arrive without warning, at distances previously considered safe, eroding confidence and reducing the operational tempo of the Tigers. German infantry accompanying the tanks were thrown into disorder. Explosions shattered cover, tore apart supply lines, and blocked planned routes, forcing units to scatter. Even elite soldiers trained for combined arms operations struggled to respond. Fear, confusion, and the deafening noise compounded into a psychological toll that began to rival the physical destruction inflicted on the armored vehicles. Tigers attempted to return fire, yet the American gunners were obscured by distance and terrain. Frustration mounted as heavy shells struck without a visible origin. Panzer commanders ordered maneuvers, but every turn risked entering another pre-calculated kill zone. The sophistication of American fire coordination exposed flaws in German assumptions about armor invulnerability and battlefield awareness, creating escalating tension. The first Tigers were knocked out by distant artillery, their crews barely reacting before fires erupted inside armored hulls. Surviving tanks halted, crews trying to understand the invisible threat. Every radio crackle brought contradictory reports, each reinforcing that the battlefield no longer followed predictable rules. Shock replaced confidence, and hesitation replaced initiative in elite German formations. Artillery observers adjusted constantly, using each impact to refine calculations, ensuring maximum disruption across the advancing Tigers. Even vehicles that avoided direct hits faced obstacles, debris, and panic among supporting units. Each misstep compounded, demonstrating that the Americans had leveraged ingenuity and coordination to create chaos, turning terrain and mathematics into a force multiplier against superior hardware. Psychological pressure mounted as tanks and crews faced threats that could not be seen or predicted. Soldiers accustomed to dominance felt powerless as invisible ordnance struck at will. Kessler's elite formations had become vulnerable not due to inferior technology, but because the enemy had exploited time, distance, and observation to undermine confidence before tanks could engage effectively. The Tigers' offensive slowed to a crawl. Maneuvering was restricted to minimize exposure, yet every pause allowed infantry and supporting guns to exploit flanks and weak points. German commanders attempted to regain initiative through aggressive orders, but the unpredictability of incoming fire disrupted communication, coordination, and timing, illustrating that technological superiority alone could not dictate battlefield outcomes. Each shell landing tens of kilometers away created secondary effects. Dust clouds obscured vision, craters blocked paths, and unexpected destruction forced improvisation. Even Tiger crews accustomed to frontal dominance could not adapt quickly. The Americans had converted theoretical artillery range into practical battlefield control, demonstrating that initiative and innovation could neutralize even the most fearsome armored weapons. By midday, Tigers were stalled or destroyed, and German infantry struggled to advance without armored cover. Each explosion reshaped the battlefield, forcing reassessment of strategies that had relied on speed, mass, and intimidation. Crews and commanders alike experienced shock without understanding, as conventional doctrine collided with a reality defined by long-range precision and unanticipated adaptability. The German response became reactive. Units attempted to regroup and re-establish lines, yet confusion, losses, and ongoing artillery fire created a downward spiral. Commanders faced dilemmas that training could not resolve, as every decision risked further casualties. The battlefield had shifted from armored supremacy to controlled attrition, with Tigers forced to endure firepower they could not directly confront. By evening, the psychological and operational impact was evident. Tigers that survived were exhausted, crews demoralized, and formations fractured. What should have been a straightforward armored breakthrough became a grinding test of endurance, observation, and improvisation. Shock without understanding defined the day, proving that technology and doctrine could be outmatched by creativity, coordination, and mastery of the unseen battlefield. The Hermann Göring Division advanced with confidence, convinced that its Tigers and seasoned crews would dominate the battlefield. Yet within hours, the illusion of superiority dissolved under relentless artillery fire. precision coordination, and unpredictable terrain. German commanders soon realized that experience and firepower were insufficient to counter the methodical destruction wrought by the unseen American guns. Panic spread among the crews as explosions tore through tanks from angles previously considered safe, shattering both vehicles and morale simultaneously. Radios crackled with confused reports, orders were misunderstood, and coordination broke down completely. Soldiers trained to rely on heavy armor and disciplined maneuvers faced a reality where their strength was neutralized, forcing improvisation under lethal pressure. The division's forward elements were cut off as destroyed tanks blocked movement corridors, forcing units to dismount and attempt pedestrian advances under constant bombardment. Infantry struggled to maintain cohesion, unable to advance without armored support. The illusion of invincibility faded as casualties mounted, forcing commanders to acknowledge that their doctrine failed in the face of adaptive, long-range firepower. Commanders attempted to regroup, but shattered communication lines and destroyed vehicles rendered control nearly impossible. Tigers that remained operational were restricted in movement, forced into defensive postures, while American forces adjusted artillery targeting to maximize disruption. Every maneuver risked additional losses, creating hesitation that compounded operational paralysis, demonstrating that elite status alone could not overcome tactical ingenuity. Soldiers witnessed comrades consumed by explosions, their screams echoing across the rocky Sicilian terrain, eroding morale further. Even the most hardened veterans of the Eastern Front and North Africa struggled to comprehend the collapse, as disciplined formations were replaced with fragmented units scrambling to survive. Psychological stress became as deadly as artillery, undermining cohesion and willingness to fight. Losses mounted faster than replacements or repairs could compensate. Fuel, ammunition, and support vehicles were destroyed or delayed, creating a cascading logistical failure. Without the ability to maneuver freely, the division could not mount an effective offensive, and German commanders were forced into reactive, disjointed decisions. The division's operational power had been rendered almost entirely useless. American artillery observers exploited every opportunity, coordinating indirect fire with reconnaissance and spotters, ensuring that every movement of the Hermann Göring Division was threatened. German units could no longer concentrate forces effectively, and every attempt to counterattack was met with accurate, long-range destruction. Technological superiority was meaningless against superior battlefield awareness and calculated disruption. Even elite crews found their Tiger tanks trapped in craters, unable to maneuver and vulnerable to follow-up artillery strikes. The terrain, combined with precise bombardments, negated the tanks' advantages. Engineers and infantry attempted to clear paths, but every effort was contested by American artillery, demonstrating that mobility and mechanical strength could be nullified without direct confrontation. Command morale collapsed as senior officers faced reports of widespread destruction, with dozens of tanks lost and hundreds of soldiers incapacitated. Decisions that would normally be routine became fraught with uncertainty. What should have been a coordinated offensive turned into a defensive scramble, with every movement risking further losses, proving that elite training could not substitute for situational mastery. German units attempted piecemeal counterattacks, but lack of cohesion and overwhelming long-range firepower prevented any recovery. Soldiers were forced into isolated pockets of defense, unable to support one another effectively. Tactical mistakes multiplied as hesitation and fear spread, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of loss that accelerated the collapse of the division's effectiveness. By late afternoon, operational objectives were abandoned. The division that had been intended to crush American beachheads now focused solely on survival. Rear elements provided limited support, but fragmentation and confusion prevented any organized resistance. The elite formation had been neutralized, proving that coordination, ingenuity, and indirect fire could defeat even the most fearsome armor. As night fell, commanders assessed the devastation. Tanks destroyed, infantry decimated, communication lines severed. The Hermann Göring Division, once the symbol of German armored might, was reduced to scattered survivors incapable of achieving its mission. What remained was a testament to the limits of conventional doctrine against adaptive strategies and a battlefield dominated by observation, precision, and relentless pressure. The morning of July 11, 1943, at Jella, revealed a brutal lesson that would echo throughout military doctrine. Traditional armored supremacy could be nullified by long-range observation, combined arms coordination, and meticulous planning. Kesselring's elite forces, equipped with Tigers and veteran crews, faced a reality that defied decades of German tactical assumptions, shaking the foundations of established armored warfare. Field Marshal Kesselring had relied on overwhelming firepower, believing that a concentrated panzer assault could obliterate unprepared infantry. Yet American artillery, observation, and adaptability proved decisive. Tanks that were considered nearly invulnerable fell to indirect fire, demonstrating that doctrinal confidence could not overcome ingenuity and coordination. The battlefield favored those who integrated flexibility with destructive precision. German commanders attempted to apply lessons from previous campaigns in Europe and North Africa. Yet those tactics faltered against dispersed fire and continuous artillery interdiction. Movement became hazardous, and elite crews discovered that surprise and mobility alone could not counteract prepared defenses. Doctrine relied on assumptions that the battlefield had already invalidated through sheer operational innovation. American forces, leveraging combined arms principles, demonstrated a shift in warfare philosophy. Indirect fire, coordination between infantry, armor, and naval support, and disciplined observation could decisively neutralize technologically superior formations. This approach prioritized flexibility, rapid adaptation, and intelligence over brute force, a revelation that challenged German and global military planners alike. The Jena engagement also underscored the importance of preparation and anticipation. The Germans assumed rapid shock and attrition would dominate. Yet careful planning and reconnaissance enabled Americans to exploit every weakness, from flanks to exposed supply lines. Battlefield lethality now depended on insight and timing, rather than armor and firepower alone, altering the calculation of victory. Despite courage and experience, elite German units could not overcome a strategy built on adaptability and observation. Tigers that had once inspired fear became liabilities when exposed to indirect fire and complex coordination. Doctrine, once considered immutable, crumbled under modern operational thinking, showing that traditional methods could not guarantee success in evolving theaters of war. By evening, Jena had proven a paradigm shift. Commanders understood that mobility, surprise, and armor were insufficient without intelligence, coordination, and long-range observation. Lessons learned would inform Allied strategy across Sicily, Italy, and eventually Western Europe, illustrating the death of old doctrine and the emergence of a new kind of warfare centered on adaptability, integration, and relentless pressure. In retrospect, the battle demonstrated that technological superiority was meaningless without tactical evolution. American forces had not only survived but had transformed the battlefield into a testing ground for modern warfare principles. The elite Hermann Göring Division was reduced to a cautionary tale, its failure symbolizing the obsolescence of doctrine when confronted with innovation, precision, and disciplined, integrated firepower.